The mat smelled like antiseptic and fear, and Mara Voss had learned to love that smell. She stood at the edge of Ring 4 with her boots taped and her hair braided tight against her skull, watching instructor Sci-Fi chalk names onto the scoring board in looping alien script. Around her, cadets from a dozen worlds stretched and murmured in 6 languages, and none of them looked at her twice. That was fine. Being overlooked was a skill, and Mara had spent 19 years perfecting it. The Verathi Combined Academy did not officially rank species by combat aptitude. Unofficially, everyone knew the order by heart. Verathi warriors first, obviously broad-shouldered, four-lunged, bred for war since before humans had discovered fire. Then the Skovan, then the Isle, then a scattering of smaller allied species, each with their claim to some ancestral fighting art. Humans came last. Humans always came last. It had been 11 years since Earth joined the coalition, 6 since the Academy accepted its first human cadets as a diplomatic courtesy nobody expected to matter. The instructors were polite about it. The other cadets were not always polite, but they didn't need to be. The scoreboard did the talking. Humans lost. Humans lost early, lost often, and mostly lost quietly, folding under the first real strike like paper in rain. Mara had lost 4 matches this term. She planned to lose a 5th today, because losing quietly kept people from looking closely, and she had reasons not to be looked at closely. Voss. Kale Thur. Ring 4. Asavai's voice cut through the noise of the training hall, flat and disinterested, the way a groundskeeper announces which weeds get pulled first. Mara stepped onto the mat. Across from her, Kale Thur unfolded himself from the bench with the loose, contemptuous ease of someone who had never lost a match he cared about. He was Verathi nobility, 3rd scion of a war-caste house, and he wore his rank the way other people wore cologne. You smelled it before he opened his mouth. Pale gold skin, ridged brow, a build like something poured rather than grown. He was, by every metric the Academy measured, the best cadet in the year. He looked at Mara the way he looked at the mat itself, a surface to be used. Again, he said, not quite to her, I keep hoping they'll pair me with someone who bleeds interestingly. A few cadets laughed. Mara said nothing. Silence was another skill. Asavai raised a hand. Begin. Kale Thur did not rush her. He never did. He liked to let the first exchange breathe, liked to watch his opponent commit to a stance before he decided how to dismantle it. Mara circled left, low, weight balanced the way her instructors back on Earth, the real ones, not the Academy's, had drilled into her before she'd ever seen a starship. She threw a testing jab. He batted it aside without moving his feet. She threw a low kick. He stepped inside it, almost lazy, and caught her by the collar. And then, because he was bored, and because the crowd liked spectacle more than technique, Kale Thur reached past her collar and closed his fist in her braid. It was legal. The Academy's combat code allowed grips on hair, cloth, and armor seams, a nod to Verathi tradition, where seizing an opponent's hair in a duel was a calculated insult, a way of saying I could take your head as easily as I've taken this. Among Verathi, it was rarely used against a true equal. Using it on a human cadet was less a tactic than a punchline. He yanked her head back, hard enough that her vision snapped white at the edges, hard enough that a gasp went up from the benches. Not sympathy, just the low hum of an audience getting the show it paid for. Pain went off in Mara like a struck bell. And underneath the pain, something else woke up. She had felt it before, twice, both times by accident, both times when she was young and scared and alone in the dark with no one to explain what was happening to her. Her grandmother had called it the pull. Her grandmother had also told her, very clearly, never to use it around people who could report her, and then had died before explaining anything else, leaving Mara with a warning and no instructions. The pull rose now unbidden, drawn up out of her by pain and fury in equal measure. It moved through her arm like a live current finding the shortest path to ground, and her free hand, she hadn't decided to move it, hadn't decided anything, closed around Kale Thur's wrist. Not his skin. Something under it. Something under everything. Kale Thur's whole body seized. To the cadets on the benches, it looked like nothing much. A human girl grabbing a Verathi's arm, an unremarkable defensive reflex. But Kael'thur felt it as a hook sinking into the center of his chest and yanking sideways, and for one impossible half-second he was looking at himself from 3 feet outside his own body, watching his own face go slack and gray, watching his knees start to buckle. He heard, very distantly, as if through water, someone himself make a sound he had never made before. Then it was over. Mara let go, staggering back, clutching her own head where the braid had torn loose, breathing like she'd sprinted a mile. Kael'thur dropped to one knee on the mat. Not from a strike. Nothing had touched him except a hand on his wrist and a hand in his hair moments before. He knelt there, gasping, one palm pressed flat against his sternum as if checking that his heart was still inside it, and for the first time in his life on that mat, the training hall went completely silent. Sci-Fi called the match. Nobody argued. Nobody, in fact, said anything at all for almost 10 seconds, which on a campus full of teenagers and young soldiers from a dozen chattering species was its own kind of alarm bell. Kael'thur was helped to the medical bay by 2 of his housemates, walking under his own power but wrong, somehow, the way a man walks wrong after a car accident he doesn't remember yet. Mara was not helped anywhere. She stood on the mat with her torn braid in her fist and watched him go, and understood, with a particular clarity of someone whose worst fear has just come true in front of witnesses, that her life at the academy had just ended and some new, much stranger life had begun in its place. She was summoned to the dean's office before she'd even showered. Dean Threll was small and quick-eyed, with a flat diplomatic voice of someone who had spent 30 years telling species they didn't like each other's business how to share a mess hall. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Cadet Voss, she said, Physician Mdai tells me Cadet Kael'thur presented with symptoms consistent with severe cardiac shock and neurological dissociation. No physical trauma. No toxin. No device. I didn't have a device, Mara said. It was technically true. I didn't say you did. Threll folded her hands. I'm asking you to explain what happened in that ring, Cadet, because right now I have 11 reports from cadets in the stands describing an event that has no explanation under any physics we teach here, and I would very much like to have my own explanation before the Verathi delegation asks for theirs. Mara thought about lying. She was good at lying. Another skill honed over 19 years of being the human girl who didn't quite fit anywhere. But lying to a dean who already had 11 witness reports and a physician's chart was not a smart bet, and Mara had learned young that the smart bet mattered more than the comfortable one. There's something in my family, she said carefully. Passed down. My grandmother had it. I don't fully understand it. I've only felt it twice before, both times by accident, and both times it was small, nothing like what happened today. Define small. A candle went out that shouldn't have. A dog stopped growling at me faster than a dog should stop growling. Mara swallowed. This was the first time it's ever touched a person. Threll studied her for a long moment. Whatever she was looking for, Mara couldn't tell if she found it. Human medical files are notoriously incomplete on your side of the coalition treaty, Threll said finally. Earth negotiated aggressive protections on biological data before you ever set foot off your own solar system. At the time, the Council assumed that was pride, or fear of exploitation. She tapped one long finger on the desk. I am beginning to wonder if it was something else. Word moved through the academy the way it always did. Fast wrong, and getting wronger with every retelling. By dinner, Mara heard 3 different versions of what had happened in Ring 4, and in every one of them she'd done something worse than what had actually occurred. Struck him with a hidden weapon, cursed him, torn something visible and terrible out of his chest that half the room swore they'd seen with their own eyes even though nobody had. She ate alone, as usual, and tried not to notice the way conversations dipped when she walked past. She noticed Kael'thur standing at the end of her table before she noticed him approaching it. He'd changed out of his training gear into a plain gray tunic, no house markings, which for a Verathi noble was practically a disguise. He looked pale under the gold of his skin, and there was a stillness to him that hadn't been there that morning. The stillness of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew. May I sit, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Mara considered telling him no. She was tired and scared, and every instinct she had said that getting close to the person she'd just accidentally half-killed was a bad plan by any measure. But he had asked, which surprised her enough that she found herself nodding before she'd fully decided to. He sat. For a while, neither of them spoke. "I have been in combat since I was 6 years old," Kael'thur said finally. "I have broken bones. I once dislocated both shoulders, sparring my own brother, and finished the match anyway. I am not telling you this to impress you. I am telling you because I need you to understand that I know what pain feels like, and what you did to me was not pain." "I don't know what it was," Mara said honestly. "I've never done that to a person before." "It felt," he said, choosing the word with visible care, "like something reached into my chest and pulled. Not my body, something under my body. For half a second I was standing outside myself, looking back at my own face, and I understood, with total clarity, the way you understand you are falling before you hit the ground, that if you had pulled a little harder, I would not have gone back in." Mara set down her fork. "I stopped." "I know." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was no contempt in it at all, just something closer to fear, carefully suppressed the way soldiers suppress fear, which is to say almost successfully. "I want to know why." "Because I'm not a killer," Mara said. "Whatever else I might be." The Verathi delegation arrived 9 days later, and with them came the questions Mara had been dreading since the moment Threll said the word treaty. She was called before a panel. Threll, 2 Verathi military attaches, a human liaison from Earth's small coalition embassy named Idris Cole, who looked like he hadn't slept since his flight in, and a xenobiologist whose species Mara didn't recognize, and whose questions were the most unsettling of the lot. They wanted to know about her grandmother. They wanted to know about the small incidents. They wanted, with an intensity that made her palms sweat, to know whether other humans had ever reported anything similar. "There are stories," Idris Cole admitted, when the panel pressed him. "Old ones. Folk accounts from before the coalition contact, people who could pull the life out of something, or into it. Every human culture has some version. We filed them as myth because that's what you do with stories that don't have instruments to measure them." "And now?" Threll asked. Cole looked at Mara for a long moment before he answered. "Now I think Earth might have quarantined itself for longer than anyone realized, for reasons that had nothing to do with technology." The xenobiologist leaned forward. "Cadet Voss, when your species first petitioned for coalition membership, your government requested and received an unusually broad exemption from standard biological screening. At the time, this was attributed to political caution. I would like your permission to run a full assay. Voluntary. But I think you already suspect what we might find." Mara thought of her grandmother's hands, the last time she saw them, closing around Mara's own and pressing something unspoken into her palm along with the warning. Asterisk, not everyone. Not always. But it runs in families, and it runs deeper than most people think. Asterisk. "I suspect," Mara said slowly, "that I'm not the only one." The assay took 6 days. Mara spent them training, because Sci-Fi, to her genuine shock, refused to excuse her from combat class, and because Kael'thur, even more shockingly, asked to be her sparring partner every session until the results came in. "You're not afraid of me," she said on the 3rd day, after he'd taken her down twice in a row without once reaching for her hair. "I am extremely afraid of you," Kael'thur said. "I would simply rather understand what I'm afraid of than pretend it isn't real. My house has fought wars against enemies with worse weapons than yours. We survived those wars by studying them, not by refusing to look. Most people don't want to look at me at all right now. Most people," he said, "are cowards dressed as warriors. It is a common condition among the Verathi. I try not to catch it." She almost smiled. It had been a strange 9 days. On the 6th day, the assay results came back, and the Academy called an emergency session of the Coalition Science Council, and Mara Voss learned that her grandmother's warning had been, if anything, an understatement. Before the results came, there were the nights. Mara lay awake in her narrow bunk more than once during that week, listening to the hum of the station's recyclers and running through every version of what the assay might find. The kindest version was that they'd find nothing, that the ring had been some freak accident, an adrenaline spike misread by frightened cadets, and life would go back to the safe, overlooked shape she'd built for herself. She didn't believe that version, not really, but she let herself hold it anyway, the way you hold a photograph of somewhere you can't go back to. The other version, the one that kept her awake, was the one where they found exactly what they were looking for, and the quiet, invisible life she'd spent 19 years constructing ended for good. She wasn't the only human at the academy losing sleep that week. Priya Anand, a second-year cadet from Earth's engineering track, cornered her outside the mess hall on the fourth night, arms crossed, voice pitched low. "Is it true?" Priya asked. "What they're saying about the essay? About all of us?" "I don't know yet," Mara admitted. "They said it's dormant in most people. 1 in 4,000 or so. It doesn't mean what?" Priya's voice cracked, just slightly, before she caught it. "My little brother is back on Earth studying for entrance exams, so he can come up here in 2 years and be treated like a person instead of a mascot. If they decide we're all sitting on something dangerous, you think that gets easier for him? You think it gets easier for any of us?" Mara didn't have an answer for that. She still didn't have one 3 weeks later, when she stepped back into Ring 4, and some nights she suspected she never fully would. But she'd learned something in that gap between the incident and the results, something her grandmother had never gotten a chance to teach her outright, that being afraid of what you are is not the same thing as deciding to hide it forever. The report was long, dense with terminology Mara didn't understand, but Cole distilled it for her afterward in the empty observation deck above the training hall, both of them watching the stars wheel slowly past the reinforced viewport. "You have a structure in your nervous system," he said, "that doesn't map to anything in the Coalition's biological catalog. Not unique to you. The assay found trace markers in about 1 human in 4,000, dormant in almost all of them. Active, fully active in you. The geneticists are calling it a tether organ, which is a terrible name, but nobody's found a better one yet. What does it do? Really do, not what happened in the ring. Near as they can tell, it lets you find the thread that connects a living thing's consciousness to its body and pull on it. Gently, it seems to do almost nothing. Under threat, under real fear or fury, it pulls hard enough to nearly sever the connection." Cole rubbed his eyes. "Cadet, there's a reason your government fought so hard for that screening exemption 11 years ago, and I don't think it was caution. I think someone back on Earth already knew what they might find if they let the Coalition look too closely, and they were scared of what would happen next." "What does happen next?" Cole didn't answer right away. Below them, in the training hall, the lights were dimming for the night cycle, rows of empty mats stretching into shadow. "I think," he said finally, "every major power in this coalition is about to become extremely interested in Earth. Some of that interest will be respectful. Some of it won't be. And I think you, Cadet, just became the single most important diplomatic asset your species has, whether you wanted the job or not." The Varathi generals did not leave after the panel disbanded. They stayed on the station for 2 more weeks, and their presence changed the shape of every hallway Mara walked down. Cadets who had ignored her for months now went quiet when she passed, the particular quiet of people recalculating where they stood. Dean Threll summoned her once more before the generals departed, this time alone, no panel, no recorder that Mara could see. The office felt smaller, without an audience. "The generals asked me a question I could not answer," Threll said. "They asked whether Earth intended this ability as a weapon, cultivated in secret and now being tested on Coalition soil. I told them the truth, that from everything I have seen, your government didn't even know what it had. That the exemption they fought for 11 years ago was fear of the unknown, not a battle plan." She studied Mara for a long moment. "Was I right to tell them that?" "Yes," Mara said, and meant it. "Nobody planned this. My grandmother barely understood it herself. She just knew enough to be scared, and scared enough to make sure I'd survive it if it ever woke up. Then here is my advice, Cadet, offered as someone who has watched a great many species join this coalition badly." Threll folded her hands the way she always did before saying something she considered important. "The generals do not fear what you can do. Varathi respect strength. They have built an entire culture around it. What they fear is not knowing where your strength ends, or who controls it. Secrecy reads as strategy to a warrior, even when it isn't one. If you want this to end in respect instead of a treaty amendment written by frightened diplomats, you will need to be seen, clearly, on your own terms, before someone else decides the terms for you. It was not comforting advice. It was, Mara thought, as she left the office, probably the most useful thing anyone had told her since the essay results came back. 3 weeks later, Mara stood again in Ring 4, and this time the benches were full in a way they'd never been for a human match. Cadets from every house, instructors along the back wall, even Dean Threll in the observer's box beside 2 Varathi generals, whose presence had nothing to do with academic interest. Across from her, Kael'thur waited in his stance, calm, focused, unafraid in the particular way of someone who has already faced the thing that used to frighten him and decided to stand and study it instead of run. "Ready?" he asked, low enough that only she could hear. Mara thought about the girl who'd stood in this ring 9 days ago, planning to lose quietly, still hiding what she was even from herself. She thought about her grandmother's hands, and the quarantine that had never really been about starships, and the 4,000 dormant threads waking up in bodies across a planet that had spent 11 years pretending to be ordinary. "Ready," she said. Asavai raised a hand. "Begin." This time, when Kael'thur reached for her hair, Mara didn't wait for the pain to wake the pull inside her. She reached first, not to hurt him, not even to win, but simply to prove, in front of every species watching, that humanity's oldest, best-kept secret was done being small, and done being quiet, and done pretending it didn't know exactly what it was. The thread between them hummed like a plucked string, and for the first time, neither of them flinched. Kael'thur felt it as a hand closing around something at the center of him. Not a hook this time, not a threat, but a question asked plainly. "Do you understand what I am now?" He answered the only way a warrior of his house knew how. He held his ground. Mara let go before it could go further, the way she had the first time. But this time there was no gasp from the benches, no silence thick with fear. Instead, slow and uneven, something strange arose from the crowd. Applause, from the Varathi cadets first, then the Skovan, then hesitantly everyone else, until even Dean Threll was on her feet in the observer's box, and the 2 generals beside her were watching Mara with the particular stillness of people revising, in real time, everything they thought they knew about the smallest, quietest species in the coalition. Asavai did not call a winner. For the first time in 6 years, the scoreboard stayed blank, and nobody in the hall seemed to mind. Afterward, walking off the mat with her torn braid retied and her hands still faintly trembling, Mara understood that she had not won a combat match at all. She had ended one era of her life and opened another, one where humanity would no longer be measured by how quietly it lost, but by how honestly it chose to be seen. Somewhere behind her, Kael'thur fell into step at her shoulder, not as an opponent anymore, and not quite as a stranger either. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Same time tomorrow," Mara said, and for the first time since she'd stepped off the shuttle from Earth, she meant it without a trace of fear.